So, hey, Studio Kata's doing a Gundam. It's been a bit, but I am currently still reeling from the recent announcement of Mobile Suit Gundam G-Quax. That's how you say it, right? I remember opening Twitter to the trailer and seeing the logo and just audibly gasping. I'm probably gonna remember it forever. What excites me the most, though, is not just the prospect of a Gundam series from the Evangelion studio, but a Gundam series from Kazuya Tsumaki and Hideaki Anno specifically, especially with Anno in a less prominent role, funnily enough. Though I'm thinking about stuff they've worked on pretty much all day, every day, seeing them collaborating on a new project got the gears in my head turning. So today I'm gonna talk about Gunbuster. Well, Diebuster. And kinda Evangelion too. Good luck, have fun, let's go. Spoilers for Neon Genesis Evangelion, End of Evangelion, Rebuild of Evangelion, Gunbuster, Diebuster. Diebuster spoilers are mostly concentrated in the first half of the series because I want this to convince people to watch it. They are still in there though, and your experience will be somewhat different if you know what happens. It's really interesting to examine the ways Hideaki Anno and Kazuya Tsurumaki's creative visions have bounced off each other throughout the years. After wrapping up their first co-directed project, a little show called Neon Genesis Evangelion, Anno dedicated himself to its sequel film, while Tsurumaki, though still working on EOE, felt it was unnecessary and just generally depressing. After Evangelion, Tsurumaki went on to make Fooly Cooly, which is somewhat of an anti-Eva. It's about a boy in the throes of puberty and all the fucked up women in his life and the robot he has a mysterious connection to. It tackles these same general themes as Eva, but with a stark turn into absurdist comedy, the complete opposite of Eva's heavy-handed introspective approach. Fooly Cooly even makes a dig at Eva in the second episode, framing its fans as annoying pseudo-intellectuals. Overall, its more laid-back tone presents an alternate perspective on Eva. Both series are great and experimental in their own ways, and they act as a good starting point for defining how these guys differ in terms of direction. Anno's stuff is dramatic, introspective, and psychosexual. It feels like you're watching a character study. Tsurumaki's is intimate in a more chill, kind of silly way. It feels like you're hanging out and trading stories with this group of interesting people. Tsumaki also does his best work building onto an Anno skeleton of some sort. They're the id and the ego, it's been said time and time again. A few years later, they reunited to work together on the Rebuild of Evangelion project, which has a much more overtly positive spin than End of Eva. Despite still being Anno's baby, it was actually primarily directed by Tsurumaki. 3.0 plus 1.0 is weird and contentious and all that, but I think it really captures how great the dichotomy between the two's direction styles can be when utilized properly. The bits Anno had more control over were, again, introspective and dramatic. Tsurumaki's portion, most significantly the part taking place in the village, Part A as the studio staff calls it, has this incredibly calm and personal and heartwarming feel to it. The time it spends just watching its characters hang out and be endearing feels real in a way I don't think Anno could really replicate. 3.0 plus 1.0 and Rebuild as a whole take the core original message of Evangelion: if you make an effort to love yourself and connect with people, you will eventually become a happier person, and focus on the final stretch of that journey, the achievement of that happiness. Shinji breaks out of the depressive spiral the TV series and the End of Eva depicted and grows into an adult. This is something that could not have been achieved without Tsurumaki. The comfortably intimate mood of Part A acts as the vehicle for Shinji's growth. He reconnects with Kensuke, Toji, and Hikari. He befriends Reikyu. He comes out of his shell. Most importantly, the events of Part A are what push Shinji to recognize that the people around him love and care for him, so that when he inevitably experiences loss again, he's able to get up and move forward, into Anno's section of the movie. In between Fooly Cooly and Rebuild, though, there was Diebuster. The Gunbuster duology is this weird little microcosm of that same situation, Tsurumaki supporting and building upon Anno's ideas, a premonition of what was to come, even. Gunbuster needs no introduction. It's a cornerstone of mecha anime, Gainax's breakout hit. It launched Anno's directorial career. Its status as a classic is undeniably deserved, given its large cultural impact and just how fucking awesome it is. But a significantly smaller amount of people seem to care about its weird little sister, Gunbuster 2, or Diebuster, which was directed by Tsurumaki with no direct involvement from Anno, partially because it's vastly overshadowed by the, according to the internet it seems, real Gunbuster 2. And that's extremely unfortunate, because Diebuster is great. It's not particularly innovative, nor did it change an entire genre forever, but it wasn't really trying to. Diebuster, in typical Tsurumaki fashion, is less dramatic, more focused on characters hanging out and bouncing off off each other. And like Rebuild, and arguably Fulikuli, it's an epilogue, building on the ideas of its Anno pen source material but shifting them ever so slightly, urging the viewer to re-examine them in a different light. Diebuster takes place thousands of years after the majority of Gunbuster. It's about a robot Genki girl named Nono and her quest to become a space pilot, despite not being traditionally qualified. Unlike in Gunbuster, here only certain individuals classified as topless are deemed fit to pilot buster machines. Nono has a run-in with a topless named Lalk Melk Mark and ends up defeating a space monster with her bare hands, or feet, and is thus allowed into Lalk's organization, the Fraternity. The funny thing about Nono as the protagonist of a mecha anime is that she doesn't ever actually pilot a mech. Watching episode 1, you feel like you know where it's going. The Fraternity will doubt Nono, but eventually she'll get the chance to pilot a buster machine and prove her worth and heroically save the world or whatever. But no. Not at all. This shift is foreshadowed in episode 2, but properly occurs in episode 3, when Nono becomes embroiled in a conflict with a topless named Taiko Science. Okay, call me a fake fan or whatever, but I have no idea how to pronounce her name. It's spelled Taiko, Taicho, literally everywhere, but if you watch the show, they are fairly clearly saying Chico. I'm gonna say Taiko to avoid confusion, but if anyone knows what the deal is, please tell me. Anyway, Nono and the abrasive Taiko get into a fight over who'll become the pilot of the new buster machine, Ketrovandi, after Taiko gets distracted and accidentally gets her old one blown up. The episode focuses on Taiko working through the childhood trauma that's been eating away at her. Nono helps her overcome the pessimism brought on by a loss she faced in her past, helping her reclaim her lost youth by showing her that there is joy and magic to be found in the world. This is actually an interesting iteration on a theme present in Gunbuster, and hey, Rebuild too, finding empowerment in moving forward from loss. Gunbuster's episode 3 focuses on Noriko developing a crush on a buster pilot from the male division before he is ultimately killed. Noriko is destroyed by it, but at the end of the episode, she gathers herself and channels her grief into cool robot fight training so she can win cool robot fights for her dead boyfriend. I really don't mean to insult Gunbuster here. Its portrayal of grief is hard-hitting and effective from a narrative perspective, but Diebuster takes the idea just a little further. Taiko's lost love has been dead for years. She's been left to wallow in her own misery, refusing to address her grief and in turn her lost childhood. In letting herself truly feel this grief before moving forward, she makes peace with the version of herself that loss ripped away from her. The moment of impact, when Taiko lost her dead boyfriend, is never shown, aside from a very brief funeral scene. We see her when he was alive, and we see her years after. This makes the dichotomy between pre- and post-loss Taiko much more noticeable, and with that comes a more complex examination of the impact grief can have. Sure, channeling your grief and rage into owning a skill that'll help you protect people is a good coping mechanism when you've just lost someone, but clinging onto that grief and letting it continue being one of your driving motivations for an extended period of time can seriously weigh you down. That's not what Noriko does. She's upset and then she gets good at piloting her machine and then she's fine. Gunbuster isn't a story about clinging to the past, but the fact that Diebuster can take one of its episodes and elaborate on its themes such that it turns into one is a testament to its dedication to bringing something new to the table. Back to Taiko's conflict with Nono though, it gets to a point where you're like, damn, this girl's awesome, she kinda deserves to pilot that robot. But this will probably end in her recognizing how Nono has helped her and handing the machine over, but no, it's the opposite. Nono, recognizing the growth Taiko has undergone, maturely comes to the conclusion that she would be a much better pilot, and thus the objective of the series shifts. Nono's role is not to change and grow and overcome obstacles, but to help the other people in her life do so. She's essentially a perpetual episode 6 Noriko, for the first few episodes anyway. The ways in which Nono impacts the rest of the cast are widespread, but nowhere are they stronger than in Lalk Melk Mark. Ironically though, in order to talk about what's so great about their relationship, we first need to talk about what gets in its way. So in Gunbuster, we have the character of Ota. He's the coach of the mech program that pulls Noriko and Kazumi from their school. He's somewhat of an imposing mentor figure in the first leg of the series. In the second, though, it's revealed that he and Kazumi are romantically entangled, and a large part of her character in the finale is dedicated to resolving this romantic relationship. And, like, yeah, it was the 90s, and you weren't really supposed to be thinking about it like that, and they kinda try to justify it by making Kazumi an adult in the end, but it's like... it's weird, man. Not just because the age gap is uncomfortable, but because it draws attention away from the connection shared by Noriko and Kazumi, the relationship at the heart of the show. There is the through line of both of them coping with the same kind of loss. Noriko loses her crush in episode 3, and when Kazumi faces the prospect of losing Ota, Noriko can help her through it based on her own experience. But nobody reflecting on Gunbuster talks about the groundbreaking romance between Kazumi and Ota, or Noriko and... this guy. They talk about Noriko and Kazumi. I'd argue that by focusing on the girls' romantic relationships with the men around them, thus weakening the Yuri elements of their relationship, a bit of impact is lost. It's all very Class S. Relationships between girls are temporary, placeholders, and will always be secondary to those with men. Also in service of this is the fact that, again, I really hate to dwell on it, but it's quite uncomfortable. Ota was in Kazumi's life in a position of power over her when she was a teenager. He's not just a man imposing on the relationship between two girls, but an adult imposing on the lives of two children. He gives them instruction, he uses them as soldiers, and his relationship with Kazumi is placed on a pedestal when it is Noriko's bond with her that really matters. That's not something Gunbuster means to explore, though. Kazumi and Ota's relationship is never called into question. The viewer is supposed to have genuine investment in it and hope for it to work out and get sad when it inevitably doesn't. That's honestly kind of funny when you think about where Anno went after this. Back to Diebuster, Lauk and Nono aren't direct analogs for Noriko and Kazumi, but their relationship is similarly central to the show, and similarly has a man trying to get in the way of it. Nicholas Vacheron is introduced in episode 2 as a member of the fraternity. He's older than Lauk, though it's unclear by how much. He also has some form of a romantic relationship with her, first shown through a scene where he lets her listen to his heart as a form of comfort. Throughout the series, he becomes increasingly more suspicious, as we learn that he is losing his power as a topless and trying to stay youthful through mysterious means that I don't want to spoil here, because the topless are at the peak of their abilities when they are young. Nicholas is a real leech of a guy, taking advantage of younger people with potential he once had and feeding off their success. This is what he does with Lauk and later attempts to do with Nono. We see Lauk breaking through his spell across episode 2. She starts off apprehensive to Nono and solidly entangled in her relationship with Nicholas. But when she has to pilot her Buster machine, 19 with Nono in the cockpit, her piloting scores increase. And the episode ends with Lauk listening to Nono's heart, finding comfort in someone at her level who truly cares for her. Throughout the series, as Nicola breaks down and his topless abilities grow weaker, so too does his relationship with Lauk. And in turn, her relationship with Nono grows more intimate. It's extremely refreshing to have a story like this go that route. The whole thing, including parts I don't really want to talk about here for spoiler reasons, honestly reminds me a lot of Revolutionary Girl Utena, to the degree that a couple years ago I jokingly looked up whether Kunihiko Ikuhara was somehow involved. And shockingly, he actually was, though just as a storyboard artist. Can you guess which episode though? 2. Hell yeah! In Diebuster, the older man figure in a relationship with the deuteragonist is not only an antagonist, but pathetic. He's an acknowledgement that the bond between Noriko and Kazumi was the real core of Gunbuster, the thing people actually cared about. Putting focus on the solidarity between the two main girls instead of their half-hearted relationships with men not only caters to the Yuri demographic that already loved Gunbuster, but emphasizes the importance of their connection. I'm not trying to frame Diebuster as particularly feminist, not intentionally at least. I kinda doubt that was at the forefront of the writer's motivations, but on a purely narrative level, I think Nicholas does act as a deconstruction of the parts of Gunbuster that Ota represents, and Nono and Lauk's relationship is made all the better for it. So what is that relationship exactly? To answer that, we first need to answer the question, what is a topless? Again, the concept of the topless did not exist in Gunbuster, only normal people doing their best. The series' full title is Top o Nerae Gunbuster, or Gunbuster Aim for the Top. Aiming for the top is essentially what Noriko does. She aspires to improve her piloting, overcome grief, persevere. It's not the top itself that matters, but the act of aiming for it that allows Noriko to accomplish everything she does. It's less of a be the best and more of a do your best, with hard work and guts, as they say. A topless, then, is entirely incapable of this. The topless's abilities rely not on their dedication, but on the circumstances of their birth, and even then don't last once they grow into adulthood. The ideology of the system constructed around the topless is not one of hard, honest work, but innate talent, with a ticking biological clock. Thus is the setup for the Lauk and Nono dynamic, a topless and a seemingly normal girl. One of the first things the audience learns about Nono is that she idolizes a mysterious heroic figure named Nonoriri. Particularly sharp viewers will be able to guess that she is talking about Noriko. She's constantly rambling about how great and powerful Nonoriri is, and how she was able to be a wonderful space pilot despite being just an ordinary girl. Lauk is quick to brush her off, still stuck in the idea that the topless are the only people able to pilot Buster machines. But as they get to know each other, as the story progresses, Lauk begins to doubt the ideas that have been fed to her. Nono proves them wrong over and over again. The topless scene in episode 1, the heart scene in episode 2. It all comes to a head in episode 5, when Lauk acknowledges how Nono has changed her. And when Nono begins to doubt herself, to disregard her own well-being, Lauk comes back to support her with what she learned from her. The mutual support the girls have for each other adds a layer of intimacy not present for Noriko and Kazumi, whose relationship was heavily reliant on Noriko's efforts. It addresses that Noriko's policy of self-sacrifice, putting herself through hell for the good of the world, can also be extremely destructive without someone to lean on. When Lalk pilots Disnoof in episode 6, she renders the topless label useless the same way Nono did in episode 1 and the same way Noriko did in episode 6 of Gunbuster. She fights as a normal girl, giving her all, aiming for the top, if you will. Episode 6 as a whole is fantastic and ties back to Gunbuster in some incredibly genius ways, everything I've discussed and more. But I won't tell you how because you need to watch it yourself. Just know that Diebuster's finale is possibly one of the best endings any show has ever gotten ever, cementing Diebuster as the best sequel anything has ever gotten ever. The series is full of all these genius little elaborations on Gunbuster's ideas. Given its looser connection to the original, it does still hold up as its own show, but if you watch it with Gunbuster in mind, both series are made better. Again, I don't think there's ever been a sequel to do it better than this one. So yeah, if you care at all about Gunbuster, or Evangelion, or Fooly Cooly, or Anno and Tsumaki as creatives, you should watch Diebuster. If you want to get a sense of what the new Gundam will probably be like, you should watch Diebuster. If there is an ounce of love in your heart for the conceptual ideas behind the rebuild of Evangelion, even if you hate how they were executed, you should watch Diebuster. If you don't care about any of this in the slightest, you should watch Diebuster. And you will love Diebuster. Also, Tsumaki fucking owns, and seeing him iterate on the Gundam formula with Anno in the background is gonna make for possibly the best thing ever of all time. Thanks for watching!